Part 175. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1741. Master Tang came soon, and Yin Or and Lu Huan were by his side. The three entered the room and looked at Man Bao with concern. Master Tang asked directly, "Man Bao, what did Su Yu say?" Man Bao looked around at everyone, and then looked at Lu Huan. Everyone followed her gaze. Lu Huan was trembling at the sight of them, and he asked tremblingly, "It has something to do with me." Master Tang smiled, stretched out his hand and patted his shoulder and said, "You better not get involved in this kind of thing, so you go out to play first." Lu Huan pointed to Yin Or and asked, "Bai Shan and Bai Cheng don't matter. Why can Yin Or listen, but I can't?" Man Bao stopped crying. His body hadn't gotten used to it yet, so he choked for a moment but still said rudely, "Master Yin is in charge of this case, you can listen if you want. Can you guarantee that Lu Shangshu will participate in this matter?" Lu Huan turned around and was about to run, but was grabbed by Master Tang. He told him, "Don't tell anyone about this room." Lu Huan broke free and said, "I'm not stupid. Run away." Although he was curious, he also knew that this was a troublesome matter. If his grandfather knew that he had caused him such a troublesome matter, he would definitely be pissed off, so let it go. Master Tang saw that he had run away, and there were no other people in the yard, so he closed the door and looked at Man Bao. "Tell me, who is the person Su Yu asked you to protect?" He thought about it in the yard for a long time and finally remembered what was wrong. When he said he could save her family, she didn't move, but there was no extra expression on her face. When she was an ant, her attitude suddenly turned cold. At that time, his first realization was that she didn't like her family. After thinking for a long time, he remembered that those people may not be her relatives. Keek told Man Bao, "Eunuch Wu is still investigating, most people are gathered in front, and no one is near your house." He added, "Suan is cleaning the yard together with the newly transferred servants. No one has contacted him at present, and he is not abnormal." Only then did Man Bao look up at Master Tang. "It's Suan, the little maid who brought me meals." Master Tang was stunned for a moment, and instantly understood, "Is it him? Who is Suan? Who are they using Suan to threaten her to commit suicide?" Man Bao nodded, "It should be, Suan is her younger brother. She said that he is her only relative in this world, but Suan doesn't know her." Man Bao said all the words Su Yu said to her and the requests one by one. Even Bai Erlang was stunned and couldn't help saying, "There are such vicious people in this world." Bai Shan's face was very ugly, and he couldn't help but ask Master Tang, "Who is it, and the means are so vicious?" Master Tang didn't answer their questions, but got up and said, "While everyone is detained by Eunuch Wu, let's pick up everything under the tree. To go to the back of Manbao's house, you have to leave the hospital door first, then walk forward for a while, and then go around to get there, which is particularly bad." It was a small garden. The girls who used to enter the palace to run for the election of Prince Liangdi lived in the courtyard on the side. This garden was for them to play. Su Yu is also in charge of the flowers and plants. Man Bao didn't know where to find a small flower hoe. Master Tang took it directly and handed it to Bai Shan. He raised his chin and said, "Go on." Bai Shan glanced at him and silently stepped forward to dig the ground. It was said to be under the plum tree, but the plum tree was not too small, so he didn't know where it was, so he picked a spot at random and hoed down first. Man Bao was stunned and reacted, and asked Keek, "Where is it?" Keek then answered in a straightforward manner, "On the side near the first plum tree." Man Bao stepped forward, pointed a spot with his foot and said, "Ho here." Bai Shan changed over without hesitation. Magistrate Tang felt that this was not good. If he wasn't there, he might as well hoe around the plum tree. As a result, Bai Shan had already hit the hoe twice, and when he hit the hoe for the third time, everyone heard a collision. Tang County Magistrate's eyes lit up. He immediately stepped forward and said to Bai Shan, "Hurry up, be careful not to break the jar." He praised Manbao again. "Manbao's luck is so good, you can point to one." Manbao nodded, "With Keek there, as long as it doesn't violate its rules, the accuracy will be as accurate as possible. It's a pity, who would have thought Suyu buried something under the tree behind her house before? She and Keek can't just probe down for no reason, can they? It's a pity that I stared at her so many points, and I have never seen her dig a hole and bury something." Bai Shan quickly dug a hole and revealed a small jar. Master Tang glanced at it and said, "This jar seems to have been buried for a lot of time." Bai Erlang volunteered to pick up the jar and opened the jar without waiting for Master Tang to speak. He glanced inside, and directly stretched out his hand to take out the contents. A stack of paper was wrapped in oilcloth, and he handed it to Magistrate Tang. Tang Magistrate immediately opened the tarpaulin to look. Seeing the names listed above, the location in the palace, and the remarks, Magistrate Tang couldn't help but heavier. Bai Shan felt cold all over after just one glance. Who has the ability to put so many people in the palace? He asked, "Are these people adopted as little as Suyu and Suan, and are they sent to the palace after training?" The county magistrate Tang folded the lists expressionlessly and said, "Mostly yes." "It's not something you can do with money," Bai Shan said. "Purchasing in the palace is fixed, and how can they be sure that the people who are sent to the palace will be obedient? One of them only needs to confess." Man Bao said, "Even Suyu doesn't know who her master is, how much can a disobedient servant of the palace know?" Bai Shan stopped talking. Tang County Magistrate stuffed something into his sleeve, pointed to another tree and said, "Dig up that tree too." Bai Shan handed the hoe to Bai Erlang. Bai Erlang stepped forward excitedly, but he regretted it for a moment. He covered his nose and asked with some disgust, "What is this?" "Man Bao, it's medicinal dregs." Tang County Magistrate squatted down and looked at it, and then stretched out his hand and twisted it, puzzled. "Where did she boil the medicine? The medicine smells so strong that other people will not know it. I checked with Eunuch Wu. In the past 2 months, she haven't taken any medicine." Bai Erlang continued to dig elsewhere in disgust, and after a while, the hoe hit something and made a dong sound. Curiously, he used the hoe to scrape away the mud on it, only to find that the entire turf had been scraped away, and there were actually 2 wooden boards underneath. Everyone looked at each other, immediately stretched out their hands and scrambled to lift the wooden board, and looked at them all, and saw that there were 2 jars neatly placed inside. Man Bao shrugged, "It seems to be a pickle jar." Master Tang reached out and wiped the jar. "It's a pickle jar, but it may not contain pickles." He picked one up, carefully opened the jar, and the smell of medicine rushed into the nose. Everyone looked at it from a distance, and they saw that there was a dark potion inside. The county magistrate said, "I probably know how the poison needle came from. See you at 9. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1742. Bai Shan also opened another jar, and they fished out 10 needles in it. There are 5 in each jar, exactly the same as the 5 that Man Bao was replaced with. Maybe because Suyu was arrested, the concoction in this jar has not been replaced for a long time, and the taste is a little heavy at this time." Everyone squatted on the ground and moved back slightly. "Bai Shandao, is this sent in by purchasing?" Master Tang nodded, "It must be." He took out the stack of papers from his sleeve, and quickly found a note that there was a person in the East Palace shopping department. "It happens to be winter again," said Master Tang, "it's more convenient for them. In winter, there are few vegetables. Except for some masters in the palace who also eat fresh vegetables, most of the maids and servants eat pickled vegetables and dried vegetables. These also need to be bought from Huangzhuang every day or from other places and sent to the palace. Come here. In winter, the most bottles and jars are transported to the palace. If the guards guarding the palace gate are not careful, such small jars are easy to get in. After sealing the mouth tightly and stuffing it in a large vat of pickles, will the guards still take out all the pickles in the vat for inspection? They could have boiled the medicine outside, sealed it and sent it to the palace, and then sent it to Suyu's hand through another person's hand. Suyu then soaked the poison needle in it, and the poison needle was soaked for 3 days. And she now has 3 sets of poison needles, that is to say, she will always have 1 pair of poison needles that have been completed and 2 sets of poison needles that are being soaked. She was able to replace the needle in it. Master Tang couldn't help but praise, what an exquisite mind. Master Tang sealed the 2 jars of poison and poison needles, let Bai Shan and Bai Erlang hug them, and returned to Man Bao's room together. Everything was placed on the table, and Master Tang pushed towards Man Bao and said, "Go and save people." Man Bao was stunned for a moment, then looked at Master Tang. "Shuexiang Tang, Suyu doesn't believe you, but I do. You are investigating the case. Would you be better off reporting it?" Master Tang shook his head and said, "I can't ask for someone with His Royal Highness, and neither do I." He said, "Suyu should have guessed it too." He lowered his eyes and looked at the things on the table and said, "I handled the case, it's my duty to solve the case, and it doesn't count as much credit. Besides, by now, the case has only been investigated halfway. Even Suyu doesn't know who is behind her, and others may not know. His Royal Highness will not give me this face," Master Tang said. "Besides, your sister-in-law is from the Wang family, so my body may not be so clean." The 4 boys widened their eyes. Master Tang smiled and said, "Why, can't you guess it? This matter is very involved, and even I don't know if I can find it. Take it, you are the most suitable." Even Master Tang couldn't help but admire Suyu, how well he could have planned so well at that time. Zhou Man is indeed the most suitable. She has a special relationship and affection with the Crown Prince and Princess concubine. Not only is she young, but she is also an imperial doctor. She seems to have something to do with this matter, but the underlying entanglement is not deep and her family background is innocent. We'll give her. It would be different if it was him, and it is impossible to say that the prince got angry and even dealt with him together. Suyu had clearly figured this out. He sighed and continued, "Everything else is fine, just 2 things. First, where do you want people to be placed?" "Take it home," Man Bao said, "let him work for my family. As long as he's not particularly bad, I'll give him a pension in the future. Magistrate Tang, I remember that you are generally old, right?" Man Bao said in an embarrassed whisper, "But I live long." She still has this confidence. "Master Tang, that's not necessarily the case. If you bring people back, you may not know how the 2 of you died in the end." 4 people. Master Tang sighed and said, "Su An's identity is a secret in the eyes of others, but it must not be in the eyes of the people behind. Suyu's suicide can also numb them for a while, and when we take the people on the list, if Suan is taken away, they will be able to guess that Suyu betrayed them. At that time, even if they wanted to kill the chickens and warn the monkeys, they would not allow Suan to live." Tang Daran said, "This is the first, and the second, if they allow him to live, it must be because of his body. The value of..." Master Tang looked at the 4 people who were still ignorant and asked, "You never thought that they could use Suan to threaten Suyu, but can't they use Suyu to threaten Suan?" Man Bao, "Suan doesn't remember Suyu." Master Tang said, "It's not that he doesn't remember, he just didn't recognize Suyu as his sister. But he must know that he has a sister. 5-year-old children already have memories, but before the age of 4, Suyu would visit him every once in a while, he must know that he has a sister. If you have a heart, give some hints, such as telling Suyu that as long as he is obedient and serves the Lord, then his sister will be able to live well in other places. He sent something to indicate that his sister sent it, you say, will he serve them?" The four of them opened their mouths in surprise. Obviously, they were young and didn't know enough about the shamelessness and viciousness of human beings. Master Tang sighed, so, it is very dangerous to let him stay by his side without knowing anything. He obviously still remembered the phrase "don't tell him" that Man Bao said. Then Man Bao hesitated between keeping his promise and his own safety and said, "Then tell him, his sister is dead." Bai Erlang shouted, "I was killed by those people." Bai Shan rubbed him a bit, "Suan is not a fool, tell him that his sister is Suyu, can he still not know? But we have to say less, at least not let him know that it was because of his appearance that Suyu chose to commit suicide." Master Tang didn't expect that. She only hesitated for a while, and couldn't help but ask, "Aren't you hesitating for a while?" Man Bao said earnestly, "This is for the good of each other. We can't let him do things that hurt relatives and make enemies happy, right?" Bai Shan and Bai Erlang nodded in agreement. They wouldn't do stupid things like in the book. Master Tang and Yin, or, shouldn't you stick to your promise and never change it? Or it's good to be more confused. Man Bao didn't bother about this. What she was bothered about was, who is going to tell him? No one speaks. Master Tang thought for a while and said, "I'll go, but before that, you have to ask someone from the prince." Suyu was like this, he didn't dare to underestimate Suan, and he also wanted to see what kind of person this Suan was. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1743. Bai Shan asked, "What if the other party finds that he can't control Suan and chooses to kill the chicken to warn the monkey?" Master Tang sighed and said, "I can't do anything right now, because I still can't find out who is behind it. Even if there is a guess in the heart, but there is no evidence, everything is in vain. Only when you have something in your hand can you have the power to negotiate with the other party." Yin, or, who had been silent for a while, suddenly said, "Send the person to my house." Master Tang looked at Yin or in surprise, and then clapped his hands happily. "This method is good, why didn't I think of it?" Man Bao also looked at Bai Shan and asked, "Will it cause you trouble?" Yin, he shook his head with a smile, and said, "As long as he has no ill will towards my family, there will be no trouble. It's just a servant, and my family can still protect it." Master Tang nodded again and again. Then I thought, did Suyu get this right? Man Bao and Bai Shan still nodded. This is indeed the best result for both parties. Yin or comforted them and said, "Don't worry, he is still very useful to me. You also know that I am not in good health, and I don't like the servants to serve me in close quarters, and I am not careful enough to live a long life. It is good to have an extra Suan by my side." Bai Shan reached out and patted his shoulder. "Thank you." Yin or smiled. Bai Shan found a basket in the room, put all those things in it, and then carried he Manbao and said, "Am I going with you?" Manbao thought about it and nodded. Master Tang also got up. "Let's go, I'll give you a ride." Yin or also got up with a smile. "I just want to go ahead to relax, let's go too." Bai Erlang also got up quickly. Count me, let's just play and wait for you in the front hall." Master Tang said with a smile, "I gave something to His Royal Highness, and His Highness still wants to give it to me. I will wait outside." So the group sent Man Bao and Bai Shan outside the prince's study. The crown prince had just listened to Eunuch Wu's report that Suyu had committed suicide, and the East Palace has been checked up and down, but so far nothing has been found, not even the dregs of medicine, let alone anyone. As soon as he heard that Zhou Man and Bai Shan were coming, he squinted and asked Eunuch Wu, "Did Suyu and Zhou Man end up together?" Eunuch Wu bowed his head and said, "Yes, Master Tang is also there, but it is said that Suyu committed suicide shortly after Master Tang entered." Before that, he was alone with Zhou Tai for a long time. The prince nodded and waved, "Go and call them in." Bai Shan went in with the basket and Man Bao. After the two of them bowed, they looked up and saw Eunuch Wu standing beside him. They were a little embarrassed. Speaking of which, Eunuch Wu was also one of the investigators. They didn't give him anything when they had something, but took it for credit, and felt very embarrassed in front of others. Seeing that Zhou Man's eyes were red and swollen, the prince said, "Crying for Suyu? Are you two in such a good relationship? Does he remember that Suyu, who she mentioned, is suspicious?" Man Bao's mood dropped again, and said, "Your Highness, Suyu's background is very poor." The prince sat and listened. Man Bao pondered for a while, polished Suyu's story, and told him it was much more miserable than what she told Master Tang just now. She couldn't hold back and wiped her tears again, but the prince's face didn't change much, just frowned. "So, Suyu committed suicide because he saw Suan?" Man Bao nodded. The prince turned his head to Wu Gonggong and said, "Go and check, how did the Yeting Palace choose, and who chose Suan?" Eunuch Wu responded and was about to go out when Man Bao suddenly remembered and immediately said, "Your Highness, Suyu told me everything before he died, and gave me the list and the poison needle. She has only one request, that is, she wants to beg for her brother a grace." She quickly opened the basket. The prince nodded to Eunuch Wu. Eunuch Wu went down and took the basket up. The prince stretched out his hand to remove the jar in the basket and glanced at it, then picked up the list on the side, read 2 pages and said, "She can record this, it seems to be quite important among those people." Man Bao looked at the prince eagerly and asked, "Your Highness, is this useful?" The prince lifted his eyelids and glanced at her, and asked, "Who is the person behind her?" Man Bao shook his head. She said she didn't know. She wrote down these lists after careful observation. There are not so many people who have really passed her. Master Tang just said that from the perspective of transporting the medicinal juice and poison needles, from outside the palace to Suyu's hands, 2 to 3 people are enough, and Suyu must do the important thing of replacing the poison needles. It can be seen that Suyu can mobilize not many people. She is a leader in it, but only a small leader. It is possible that so many people on the list have been observed by her over the years, and she has marked her own doubts, not sure whether the people she wrote belong to the same master, or are other people's detailed works. The same kind always has a special feeling for the same kind. Suyu walked more smoothly, but it was because she was smarter and more cautious than others. Man Bao paused for a while. He didn't tell the Prince Tang's reasoning, so let Mr. Tang talk to the prince. The prince slowly turned a few pages, and as soon as he looked up, he met Zhou Man and Bai Shan's expectant eyes, and he couldn't help frowning. "You brought these things in exchange for Su An's life?" Man Bao nodded and said, "This is what I promised her." The prince sneered, "Really, Gu still thought she was coercing you." He closed the list and said, "Although Suan is not on this list, he was sent to the palace just like Suyu. Can he be clean?" Man Bao was stunned for a moment and asked, "Is your Highness unwilling to let him go?" The prince frowned. Bai Shan hurriedly saluted, "Your Highness, since they value Suyu more, Suan is just a proton for now. Before Suyu's accident, they will definitely not let Suan do anything." The prince looked down at the two of them condescendingly, and saw them panic. He got up and walked to the two of them, looked at them and said, "Gu can let him go, but will they let him go?" Man Bao hurriedly knelt down and said, "His Royal Highness, we will find a way to give him a place to rest. I beg your Highness to do it." The prince turned around twice, and saw that both of them looked at him apprehensively. Zhou Man was still wearing blood-stained clothes. He took another look at the things on the case. Still nodded. When Man Bao was happy, he shouted, "Thank you, Your Highness, you are such a good person." The prince snorted coldly, "Although people are given to you, Whether you can survive depends entirely on your ability and his good fortune. He looked at Zhou Man with deep eyes and said, Gu really doesn't want to give him to you. Another reason is that Gu doesn't want to rip you out of this pool of sewage. When you get down, it's impossible to get out of your body. He is a very talented person, and I hope you will learn your medical skills well and see your illness. Man Bao said in a low voice, Your Highness, I have already taken a step, and I can't help but look back. Yesterday, I agreed to go to see Suyu, and today I stayed in the room to listen to what Suyu said. I'm dead right in front of me, and since I've complied with her, I'll try to achieve what she wants. Good night. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1744. There was silence in the room for a moment, and the prince finally looked at Eunuch Wu and nodded slightly to him. Eunuch Wu immediately said, The slave will find an excuse tomorrow to give Suan to Dr. Zhou. The prince nodded, glanced at Zhou Man and Bai Shan, and asked, How are you going to arrange people? The two laughed, trying to fool the past. The prince snorted coldly when he saw it, and warned again, Just don't give up your life. Man Bao was curious about another point, how will your highness deal with the people on the list? Naturally, it's just how to deal with it. Dare to be a spy in the palace, basically there is only one dead end. Not to mention Man Bao, even Bai Shan felt a little sad and couldn't bear to say, His Royal Highness, I read the notes on the list, it seems that some people haven't done anything yet. The prince said, If they haven't done it, it doesn't mean they're good. He knew that they were sympathizing with those people, and said with a cold expression, What do you think they are doing in the palace? Just to harm the orphan or the prince and grandson. What they want to harm is the whole country. From the beginning, you can no longer be called a person. Man Bao murmured in a low voice, but they don't have a choice either. Bai Shan pulled Man Bao, but the prince said angrily, Gu also has no choice. When Gu was born as the eldest son, no one asked Gu if he wanted or not, and when Gu was established as the prince, no one asked Gu if he wanted to. When the three people in the room were speechless. The prince snorted twice and waved his hand impatiently, Go away, go and bring in Tang Hexuan who is waiting outside. The prince got angry when he thought of this, and the credit went back and forth twice. Everyone was waiting outside. Who was he fooling? Seeing that the prince had figured it out, Bai Shan hurriedly took Man Bao to retire and handed over the Shuro field to Master Tang. Seeing that they were pulling Bai Chenjian or two away, Master Tang shook his head, tidied up his clothes, and entered the room solemnly to be scolded. Get scolded and deal with it. There are also people from Taiji Palace on the list, and it seems that they have entered the palace earlier. Although there are doubts on the back, it seems that they are not the same master as Suyu, but they are still frightening. This is not a small matter, and it must be reported to the emperor. While the news has not been leaked, I will find an excuse to take people and interrogate them first. It's just that the prince in the East Palace can still call the shots. If you want to take Yeting Palace, Taiji Palace, especially the people in the Taiji Palace, it must be approved by the emperor or the queen. Otherwise, if you don't know it, you think the prince is going to rebel. The prince pondered for a moment and asked, How credible are these lists made by Suyu? After thinking about it, Master Tang said, As long as Suan's identity is true, then this list is 80% credible. After thinking about it, he said, Even if it is meticulous work, there must be something to ask for. She can even give up her own life. The lower official thinks what she said is true. Looking at her remarks alone, these many people seem to have been observed by herself, not the list she should know. Tang Daran said, Suyu is a very careful and cautious person, and her mentality is still very strong. The Prudence and Punishment Department used so many punishments to make her let go, but she doesn't want to die, which shows that she is strong. He never underestimated anyone. The prince nodded, and finally got up with something, go to the father and emperor alone, you can go to your Shangguan. This is to let Yin Li come forward to convince the emperor. Master Tang responded, and then went to find Yin Li. The prince went directly to the emperor. The emperor was also startled when he saw the list, and his face became even bluer when he listened to the story of Su Yu, which Zhou Man recounted by the prince. He put down the list in his hand, clenched his hand slightly into a fist, and didn't speak for a while. Father, I see that some of the people on the list are not too young. They look like they were in the palace in the previous dynasty. In this world, apart from those few families, who else would put spies in the palace like this? The emperor asked with a livid face, what do you want to do? The prince's face flashed hostility and said, take them all, ask what to say, as long as you find out who they are, they will be isolated. The emperor lifted his eyelids and glanced at him, and asked, you haven't become an emperor yet, it's like being a tyrant. Prince. The emperor's anger finally found a vent, and he scolded his face, you have read all the books. Didn't the history books of the previous dynasty come out and gave you a book? How did you read them? Do you think they are its muddy? Do you want to barbarize his 3 clans? Do you know how many people there are in a family of 3? 10,000 people, 10,000 people. Let's not say whether there are local governors and Jadu envoys among the 10,000 people, just their own family members and the tenants they support. Think they can't make De Jin become the former dynasty again, and make you become the last emperor again? The prince wiped the saliva from his face, and said aggrievedly, then let's just forget about it. Father, they began to put people in the palace more than 10 years ago. At that time, I was named the prince. Only when they became emperors, what do they want to do? The emperor thought about what happened 13 years ago. It seemed that the major event of that year was the military chaos in Yuzhou, and 2 years ago, he was the only one who ascended the throne. He thought about it for a long time before he remembered something. I seem to have held the imperial examination for 2 years in a row. The prince frowned and looked up at his father. The emperor frowned and faintly found the joint. Seeing his father's silence, the crown prince couldn't help but ask, Father, don't you want to take a step back? The emperor returned to his senses, lifted his eyelids and glanced at him, and said angrily, I'm not stupid. The imperial examination is a major national plan. It took me 15 years to stabilize the situation, why should I retreat? The former dynasties would perish. The last emperor was very happy with his achievements, he fought all year round, and the people's taxes were strict. But it was also because of suppressing the family and replacing the 9-rank Zhongzheng system with imperial examinations. As the emperor who wiped out the previous dynasty, he knew that the rebellion of the previous dynasty would not have been so swift if it hadn't been stopped by those aristocratic families. Ahem, of course, their Li family was one of them back then. But in his position to pursue his political affairs, the emperor is willing to be a little slower and gentler, but what should be done is still to be done. The national plan of taking the imperial examinations cannot be changed. As soon as the emperor looked up, seeing that the prince was still a little indignant, he sighed and asked quietly, Darlin, do you know what is most important to being an emperor? Prince, Wingming Shenwu. Emperor. No. Prince, is that humbly accepting remonstrance? The emperor said angrily, neither. The crown prince was also a little angry, and said, I don't know. Father, just say it directly, what is it? The emperor glanced at him, took a pen from the pen holder, and wrote a word on the white paper with force through the back of the paper. The prince couldn't believe it, forbearance. That's right, the emperor said, do you think that when you become an emperor, you can do whatever you want? Why did the previous dynasty perish? Because the last emperor was too arbitrary and too unbearable. Next update around 9 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1745. He said, "Your Majesty is the most important, because you can endure what ordinary people can't bear." The emperor's expression flashed with some nostalgia, and said, "The last emperor of the previous dynasty was not weaker than others, but he was too unrestrained and did not know how to restrain himself. He thought that the world was in his hands, and he could do whatever he wanted. He doesn't have the patience for the people, he does whatever he wants, so he doesn't take the people of the world in his heart, and he doesn't treat the people as human beings. He doesn't have the patience for the aristocratic families, he just blindly asks." But the royal father, "This time we didn't feel sorry for the aristocratic family." The prince couldn't help grabbing his father's words, "They are plotting against us." The emperor lifted his eyelids to look at him, and said, "For some people, we have reduced the selection of officials to the 9th grade over the past few years, and we are sorry for them by taking the imperial examinations more." The emperor was silent for a moment, thinking that there were only their father and son in the study anyway, and he said plainly, "In our Li family's view, this is the world of my Li family, but in the eyes of those aristocratic families, this world belongs to them. Govern with our Li family." He twitched the corners of his mouth and said, "Before, I wanted to re-edit the clan chronicle and redesignate the family, and as a result, the Kui clan could not enter the court for 3 years. How many heads of each family are officials in the court? Who would dare to disobey the orders of the patriarch? And among the civil and military affairs of the Manchu dynasty, how many people are in my Li clan, and how many people are in the wealthy families of each family?" The emperor said, "The emperor is rich in Kyushu, but Kyushu needs people to govern. Inspectors, Jadushi, it is impossible for the emperor to gather all the affairs of the world in one person, so this world is governed by the emperor and his civil and military officials." He said meaningfully, "When more than half of the civil and military affairs of the Manchu dynasty came from a noble family, then the world was ruled by a wealthy family and the emperor." The prince opened his mouth and was speechless. So whether it's the family redetermining the grades, or the imperial examinations taking up the positions of the 9-grade officials, in their opinion, it's me, Li, who is sorry for them. The emperor asked the silent prince, "You want to fight them? Do you want to be like the last emperor of the previous dynasty, like the last emperor of the previous dynasty, to fight against the world's wealthy families and fight for decades?" The prince's face paled. "They will raise troops." The emperor said slowly, "You are going to slaughter their 3 clans, with swordsmen and soldiers. They will naturally fight to the death in order to survive." The prince thought for a while, and his chest rose and fell sharply, but he couldn't bear the breath, and couldn't help but annoyed. "Do we just forget about this matter?" "Of course not." The emperor's face also turned cold. He pointed to the list on the case and said, "You don't need to think about the 3 clans of Yi and the others. You definitely won't be able to find the direct descendants, but it's still okay to kill chickens and show monkeys." The emperor said, "I told you to endure, but I didn't let you be a tortoise. If you have something to do, you need to open one eye and close the other. The closed eye pretends not to see something, but the open eye needs to see the way forward. Don't just talk about the 3 tribes of the Yi people. This will only make people feel that you are cruel and ruthless. This is a big taboo for you." When he was most angry with Wei Ji, he only said that he would kill him, but he didn't say anything. Even his family was killed. The prince was thoughtful, and after a while, he returned to his senses and asked, "Then what about these people, killing all the monkeys?" The emperor just glared at him, "Can't think of anything other than fighting or killing." The prince remembered after being stared at, "Why don't you find an excuse to let Lord Yin and Tang He arrest all of them and make them all their own?" The emperor said, "The people behind are not fools. Let Yin Li and Tang He choose one, kill some of them, and keep some of them who are willing to serve. It can not only kill chickens, but also keep some spies we know." The crown prince complained, "There are too many spies in the palace, can't we find a way to find them all? If I say, it's better to find one, and killing the person behind it is really killing the chicken and the monkey. The emperor shook his head, glanced at the prince and said, "Don't mention anything else, just say your uncle and your Yu family, don't they have eyeliner in the palace? They can always find a way to inquire about what happens in the palace. If you really want to ask sins, do you even want to ask them?" When the prince heard this, he immediately stopped talking. The emperor said, "They may not be like the people behind Suyu who have trained people and sent them to the palace since childhood, but they will befriend the palace servants and palace maids, bribe them, and get some news from them. It must be done a lot. When I first ascended the throne, your mother found an excuse to release a group of people. One was to pity those palace maids, the other was because there were a lot of eyeliners in the palace at that time, not only those left by the previous dynasty, but also the first prince, first three the prince and the wealthy people of various families." The emperor paused and sighed. It was precisely because a lot of palace maids and chamberlains were released in the palace at that time, so the people with intentions began to recruit some orphans to train and send them to the palace. Middle. When the emperor said this, he felt a little sad in his heart. Most of the people on the list were not very old, and they should have been brought into the palace in those years. Regardless of whether they are outside the palace or inside the palace, these people are his people. They should be the same as Suyu. From the moment they were taken in, their fate could not be controlled by themselves. Thinking of this, the emperor looked up at the prince and said earnestly, "Darling, don't underestimate anyone in this world. Look at Suyu, just a slave. Maybe in the eyes of you and the people behind her, she is not even a human being. It doesn't count. But it's her." The emperor clicked on the list on the table and said, "I stabbed them with a knife. This knife can destroy their business for many years." The emperor had not felt this way for a long time, and it was only when he was young on the battlefield that he felt this way. Because no one knew whose sword, whose arrow, or a stray arrow from somewhere could kill him, he never dared to underestimate anyone at that time. But after being in power for so many years, the emperor had long forgotten that feeling. The prince lowered his eyes and thought, if Jo-man hadn't been sensitive and had noticed something wrong early on, she really used that set of poisonous needles. If something happened to the princess and the child, not only would Jo-man's head fall off, but he would also be too big. Taken aback, you must know that he urgently needs a child now. If something happens to his child, not only the third child, but also the other younger brothers will be worried. Thinking of this, the prince opened his mouth, hesitated for a moment, but still didn't say anything. The emperor glanced at him and felt a little more satisfied. The child finally learned the truth that some words should not be spoken. So he waved his hand and said, "Okay, don't worry about this matter. The imperial physician office is about to open, and there are also freshmen from the vassal state who want to enroll in the imperial college. You need to worry more, and leave this to Yin Li to handle it." When Yin Li came over, the emperor said what the prince had not done, especially check the mother's family of the fifth prince. "I originally wanted to update the two chapters together, but the second chapter is still a few hundred words short. I was too tired to climb the mountain today, so I wrote it a little slowly, so the next chapter will be in half an hour." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1746. Yin Li had already learned about the situation from Tang He, and naturally he had some guesses. He took over the list without saying much about the change in his expression, so he should take it down. The emperor said with deep eyes, "You check first. If you have evidence, you must get it first. This time, I don't plan to appease too much. So this is to kill the chicken and warn the monkeys." Yin Li bowed his head in response, stepped back and approached Tang He. "I remember you and Yang Heshu of the Yang family are very close. Tang He had already anticipated it, bowed his head in response, and then assured, the lower official will handle it fairly. Yin Li stared at him for a while and nodded. Tang He breathed a sigh of relief, and couldn't help but tell Yin Li, "Sir, Yang Changbo is talented and has a bright future. He doesn't need to use these ghostly tricks." Yin Li glanced at him and said, "Of course I know. How old was he 13 or 14 years ago? However, because he didn't do it, it doesn't mean he won't be implicated." Tang He was not quite sure, Yang Hao he probably won't either. Changbo is so good, it will not be difficult for him to be named a marquis in the future. Being a foreign relative is far less than the glory brought by Changbo alone. Yin Li asked indifferently, 13 or 4 years ago, did Lord Yang think so? Tang He stopped talking. 13 or 14 years ago, although Yang Heshu was already known as a genius, he was the child of someone else in a wealthy family, but no matter how powerful he was only in his early 10 years. Yin Li said, check it first. No matter how much we say at this time, it's all guesswork. Only by checking it clearly will be the greatest benefit to him. Tang He nodded. But they all knew in their hearts that it would be difficult to find out who was behind them in the palace. In all the dynasties, which aristocratic family did not put some people in the palace? Tang He thought about it, since it is not easy to check inside the palace, then check it from outside the palace. He remembered something, and Fu Er said a few words in Yin Li's ear. Yin Li raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded after a while, go ahead. So Tang He turned around and left the palace to get Su Yu's aunt, the one who gave her orders and delivered the news. Yin Li sat in the palace and raided many palaces in the name of investigating the poison needles that were replaced by the imperial physicians. The inner servants and palace maids were all detained and interrogated separately, and the people on the list were taken to other places for secret interrogation. Of course, this is something that adults only worry about, and they don't have much relationship with Man Bao anymore. As soon as they came out of the prince's study, they ran back to the Chongguan Museum. After thinking about it, they still brought Suan. The 4 of them sat on the chairs and all looked at him with bright eyes. Suan was worried and didn't know what he had done. Seeing that they didn't speak, Bai Erlang couldn't help but speak first, Suan, are you careful? Suan was stunned for a moment, his face changed greatly, he knelt on the ground with a put, and shook his head again and again, Sir, please forgive me, but the servant has done something wrong. Tell me, I will change everything, and please forgive me. The slave is dead. Tears fell down his cheeks and he cried, if the steward hears this, the servant will not have to live. Not to mention Man Bao, even Bai Shan glared at Bai Erlang in disapproval, and said, what are you doing to scare him? Bai Erlang widened his eyes and looked at the 2 of them in disbelief, I scare him? Isn't what I said the truth? Su An's face turned even paler, and he kept kowtowing and begging for mercy, only begging Bai Er to spare his life. Seeing him like this, Bai Er was instantly angry. He always felt that his appearance was very familiar. After thinking about it for a long time, he finally remembered it. He turned to look at Yin He who was sitting beside him and said, he is like you before. Yin He, who was about to say something good to Bai Er and pierce through Suan, listened to it, and immediately ignored him and didn't speak. He looked at him so anxious that his face turned red. Bai Shan and Man Bao were not fools either, so they could see that half of Suan was pretending, but they knew the truth. Su Yu died, and the 2 of them couldn't help feeling pity for him. So Man Bao sighed and stopped Suan from kowtowing. Seeing that after a short while, his forehead was bleeding from the kowtow, he frowned, you don't have to do this, we have no ill intentions, you. Man Bao paused, looked at Bai Shan, and finally chose himself, your sister, she. She said vaguely, she handed you over to us. Suan, who still wanted to continue kowtowing and sympathizing, was stunned in the same place. After looking at Man Bao for a while, he immediately returned to his senses, and lowered his head slightly to calm his mind. Master Zhou is joking, I have been in the palace since I was a child, and everyone in my family has. I don't remember, what kind of sister is there? Bai Erlang calmed down, probably thinking of his tragic life experience and no longer caring about what happened just now. Man Bao also fell silent, not knowing how to tell him. After all, she had promised Su Yu not to tell him before. Bai Shan looked at her, but still opened his mouth and said, her name is Su Yu, you should know that, right? Su Anqiang smiled and said, Bai Gongzi, forgive me, Su Yuki killed the emperor's grandson, how can she be the slave's sister? Man Bao stretched out his hand to hold Bai Shan down, raised his head and said to him, Su Yu said that she has a younger brother. Probably when he was more than 2 years old, they were displaced by the military disaster, and then they were taken in by a family and raised in Zhuangzi. Those people want to cultivate them into meticulous craftsmen, because she is good at learning, so she can visit her brother once a month. Later, when she came to the palace, those people said that as long as she was obedient, her brother would be in Zhuangzi. Read and read, and you will have a good life in the future. Man Bao looked at Suan, who was silent, and said, but within 2 years, she saw you in the palace. She was afraid of causing trouble for you, so she didn't dare to recognize you, but I think, with her personality, I will definitely find a way to take care of you in other ways. Have you been given goodwill for no reason? Suan lowered his head and lowered his eyes, so that no one could see his expression. Man Bao paused and continued, I promised her that I will take you out, and I will try my best to save your life. His Royal Highness has promised to give you to me. In the future, you don't have to listen to the words over there. Already? She said, I won't ask you anything about those people, we just treat each other like that. Suan's tears, who had been bowing his head all the time, fell drop by drop, which was different from the mournful cry just now. This time, he didn't let them see the tears in his eyes, and didn't make a sound. They would hardly have known he was crying if they hadn't seen what seemed to be wet on his knees. This time, even Bai Erlang couldn't help scratching his head, and apologized embarrassingly, okay, it was my fault just now, I shouldn't have asked you those questions rashly. Man Bao got up and took the medicine box over and said, I'll treat the wound on your forehead for you. Suan kept his head down and refused to lift it up. Bai Shan shook his head slightly at Man Bao. Man Bao stopped forcing him and let him clean up his emotions alone. After a while, he raised his head. There were not many tears in his eyes, but the corners and bottom of his eyes were a little red and swollen, and his eyes were almost full of red blood. He asked in a hoarse voice, Master Zhou, can I see her? See you tomorrow. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1747. Su Yu's body was moved to a shabby room in the courtyard where the servants lived in the back, which is usually where the servants and palace maids who committed crimes were imprisoned. Most of the servants and maids who died in the palace were directly thrown onto the trolley and pulled out to be buried. There is also a crime like Su Yu, who basically died in the Department of Judgment and Punishment, and was temporarily suspended in the Department of Judgment and Punishment, and was dragged out and thrown away when the case was understood. In the end, she was lucky, she was able to go to the Department of Prudential Penalty for treatment before she died, and she died outside. And Su Yu's case wasn't counted, so Eunuch Wu just found a place to park the body at that time, before it could be dealt with. Man Bao didn't even need to look for Eunuch Wu, he went to find one of Eunuch Wu's servants. Su Yu's body was casually placed on a wooden board, covered with a quilt. Seeing that Man Bao and Suan were standing still, Bai Shan took the initiative to step forward and lift the quilt, revealing only her head and face. The chopsticks around her neck had been taken out, her clothes were almost dyed red, and there was blood on her face. Obviously, no one had cleaned her up. Bai Shan hesitated for a moment or let him go, so that Suan behind him could see her. Suan took 2 steps forward, lowered his head and quietly looked at the person lying on the board. After watching for a long time, he dug out some things that seemed to be related to her from his memory, as if he had seen her in the Yeting Palace. But when the two passed by mistake, the other never stopped. Speaking of his sister, he still thinks more of the memory of a very vague little girl stuffing snacks into his hands when he was very young. Suan took another 2 steps forward and looked at Suyu carefully. He remembered that when he brought the food box to Imperial Dr. Zhou this morning, he looked up, and the other party seemed to be still sitting on the bed, looking in good spirits. Suan opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but found that he couldn't make a sound for a while, so he simply closed his mouth again. Bai Shan pulled Man Bao, and the two pulled Bai Erlang and Yin Or out. The four sat together on the railing outside and waited. As soon as the four of them left, tears in Suan's eyes began to fall. He walked to the board and squatted down to look at her. He pulled out his sleeve and carefully wiped the blood on her face, because the blood had already dried, so he couldn't wipe it clean for a while. He simply knelt on the ground and stared at her blankly. It was only after a while that he saw some similarities to him from her face, and only then did he reluctantly find from his memory the appearance that coincided with her childhood. Suan thought of something, and hurriedly stretched out some of her clothes, and pulled out a dull red rope from the inside. There was some blood on the rope, and a very small piece knot was tied on it. Suan also pulled out the same red string from his collar. He couldn't bear it any longer, and lay on top of her, suppressing woo-woo and crying. This was the first time my sister learned to tie knots for the two of them. They couldn't leave marks on them, and they couldn't send tokens to each other. Such things as peace knots are usually worn by nobles on their waists, and my sister made a very small one for him and herself, which can be worn around the neck, and can be kept in her arms during class, so that the stewards cannot see it. He kept it carefully, for fear of accidentally leaving it behind. The four people sitting outside heard the low cry from the room and couldn't help sighing, their shoulders slumped. Yin, he asked Man Bao in a low voice, the matter hasn't spread out yet, only a few of us and Senior Highness Tang Xuexian know about it, but once the investigation is released in the palace, they will definitely guess that you are involved. Suan, also, can you deliver it to my house? What can you do? Man Bao shook his legs and said nothing. Bai Shan said, don't worry, we know what we know. Most of us still live in the palace, and they don't dare to do anything. Bai Shan turned his head to look at Man Bao and said, when will you go to the imperial physician's office tomorrow? Man Bao said, it's time. Bai Shan nodded, knowing what to do. Suan stayed in the house for a long time. When he came out of the house, his eyes were swollen to the point where he knelt down and kowtowed when he saw Man Bao. Man Bao hurriedly stepped forward to pull him up, but he knelt down and didn't move. Instead he knocked again and said, Master Zhou, the servant wants to take a basin of water to sort out her remains and change her into clean clothes. Please, also please, Master Zhou. After thinking about it, Man Bao nodded and said, her clothes are still in the room. I'll find a set to help her put on in a while, and you can do the rest yourself. She paused and then said, when the palace is finished investigating the case, I will tell Eunuch Wu, go back and send the body out, and you can take it for burial. Suan looked up at Man Bao in surprise and asked, am I going to leave the palace? Man Bao nodded slightly, then pointed to Yin He and said, I have already agreed with young Master Yin, you will follow him for the time being. You know, the palace is not safe. I am just a little imperial doctor now, I can't protect you for the time being, so you should follow young Master Yin first. Yin Or nodded slightly to Suan. Suan didn't expect that Zhou Man would even think of this, and so far he hasn't asked him about other things about doing detailed work. He opened his mouth, and finally kowtowed solemnly, choked, yes, thank you Lord Zhou and the three young masters. Man Bao went to find a set of Suyu's clothes. In fact, she only had palace clothes and basically had no other clothes. and her stature is smaller than her, and her clothes are not suitable for her, so she can only change into palace clothes. Suan didn't mind at all, it would be nice to be able to change into clean clothes. He wiped off the blood on her face and neck, looked at her carefully, and felt that she and him were more and more like him. It was really strange. They were obviously in the palace before, so how could he not recognize her? They said that the elder sister was sent to another mansion, and she might be a concubine in the future, and the child she gave birth was still a son. But it turned out that they were in the palace together? Still so close, she knew him, but he didn't recognize her. Suan threw the handkerchief back into the tub, looked at her carefully, and then picked up the new quilt he brought to cover her. It was getting dark now, and the four of them pulled him away together. Bai Shan said, "Since you were sent by Eunuch Wu to serve us, then you can sleep in our room tonight." Suan opened his mouth and nodded under the gazes of the four of them. At this time, he was also a little confused, not sure what to do in the future. Does he really want to go out of the palace with them? At night, he was lying on his feet and could not fall asleep. Bai Shan, who was sleeping on the bed, suddenly whispered, "Suan, it is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge in 10 years, because a gentleman must accumulate strength and wait for an opportunity. To take revenge, you must know how to be patient. Otherwise, it's just a moth to the flame. It will not only disappoint the four of us, but also your sister." In the dark night, Suan looked at the roof with his eyes open, and asked softly, "I am a rootless plant, can I really take revenge?" Bai Shandao, actually, your sister has already avenged herself. She has stabbed them like a sharp knife and tore off a large piece of flesh. She can do this in a hurry, not to mention you what. I have always believed that God has the way and the virtue of good life, and if they do a lot of unrighteousness, they will always be attacked. See you at 4 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1748. Suan didn't speak for a long time, Bai Shan waited for a long time, and when he was about to fall asleep in a daze, he vaguely heard Suan slowly answer okay. Bai Shan didn't even know if he had a dream last night, but today he was in a good mood. After thinking about it, he didn't even ask him. Eunuch Wu was seconded by Lord Yin. They interrogated many people on the pretext of investigating Su Yu's accomplices. Some of them were just passing through, while others were secretly brought to 11 Niiwen for questioning. From escorting people to interrogation, it was all done by people from the imperial army. Yin Li also deliberately chose his trusted confidants. No one knew that those servants and palace maids had been taken alone. Man Bao deliberately changed into a new official uniform today, and as soon as he went out, he met Eunuch Wu, who came to look for her with dark circles. Eunuch Wu gave her a document. "This is Suan's body contract, His Highness rewarded you, but it's not easy to cross the road at the moment, so his roster is still at Yeting Palace. Wait for a while. God, after the person who should be checked is finished, His Highness will erase his name again." "But Lord Zhou can take people away today," Eunuch Wu said in a low voice after a pause. "Lord Zhou Xiao, now only a few of us know about Su Yu's confession, you have to quietly take him away." "Yes, fortunately, the management of the palaces has been a little strict these 2 days, and it is not easy for them to spread the news, but when going outside, Suan had better not show his face, so as not to be guessed about the affairs in the palace in advance. He's not good either." Man Bao nodded in agreement, and after receiving Suan's body contract, he went to pick him up at Chongguan Hall. She was going to take a class at the imperial physician's office, and Eunuch Wu asked Suan to drive her a car, just in time to find an excuse to leave the palace. After leaving the imperial city, Man Bao said, "Let's go to Yin Mansion first." Suan's face was blank. Unlike Rong Si, who often ran errands outside the palace, he had never left the palace since he entered the palace, and had no idea where the Yin residence was. Even the horse-drawn carriage was stumbling. When Man Bao saw it, he sat on the carriage, took the whip and reins in his hand, and drove the carriage around the road. Suan sat beside him, and when he reached the gate of the Yin mansion, Man Bao handed him his body deed. This is your body deed, but your name is still in the Yeting Palace, and you have to cross the Ming Road to get out. Gong has to wait for a few days. During this time you should stay in Yin's house and don't go out. No one dares to face your disadvantage at Yin's house. Suan stretched out his hand to take his body deed and glanced at it, then closed his hands and gave it to Man Bao. Seeing that Man Bao refused to take it, he got out of the car and knelt under the car and gave it to Man Bao. Man Bao quickly leaned over to pull him. What are you doing? Suan insisted on his knees and said, Master Zhou, the slave knows that you rescued me from the palace because of my sister, but I am a servant, and I have nowhere to go outside the palace, and I have no other means of earning a living other than serving others. Lord Zhou accepts the servant, and in the future, wherever you let the servant go, the servant will go. In fact, Man Bao had been thinking about it since last night. It would be expedient to keep Suan by Yin or his side. After a few years, this matter faded away. Where should he go? He was alone, and the outside world was unfamiliar, so she must be frightened, so she planned to take care of him. She said, you follow Yin or first, and after a few years, everyone will forget about this matter. You can go wherever you want. If you want to stay with us, you can get along. We can get along as friends. Suan shook his head, lifted the body deed in his hand even higher, and insisted, the servant will not go anywhere, and will obey Lord Zhou's orders for the rest of his life. He paused and said, Master Zhou, this servant knows that my elder sister has done something wrong before. She changed the needle bag of Lord Zhou and almost killed the princess, the grandson, and you, but you still don't remember the villain's deeds. If you are willing to help my sister take in the slave, even the slave can't be repaid in a lifetime, please accept the slave. Seeing that someone in the Yin residence had already opened the side door, Man Bao hurriedly took the deed. Okay, I'll keep it for you first, let's go, let's meet Mrs. Yin. Man Bao turned around and took out his basket from the carriage, and entered the Yin mansion with Suan. Yin wrote a letter to Mrs. Yin, asking her to take care of Suan on her behalf. Everything should be based on longevity. As for Suan's origin, he said that his father knew it. I don't know that Yin Li, whose son specially took a hot potato from Zhou Man's hand, is still working overtime in the palace. He didn't come back last night, and the palace has been very strange recently, and even Mrs. Yin felt a little uneasy. So when she saw Man Bao, she quickly responded to the matter, then put the letter aside, and mainly asked about Yin Or's situation. Man Bao said that Yin took medicine on time every day, practiced body and boxing on time, and also took acupuncture seriously every 3 days, and his pulse was much better. Mrs. Yin breathed a sigh of relief, and then accepted Suan and asked the steward to politely bring the person to her grandson's yard for placement. Yin couldn't listen to the noise, so his yard was still very deserted, and it became even more deserted after he lived in the palace. Basically, only Chang Shao and an old mother were there. Man Bao sent the person to the fork, and she took out a copy of the Analects from the basket and gave it to him. I remember that you can read. If you are bored here, why don't you read it, and I'll give it to you next time after reading it. 1. She said, reading makes me feel a lot better. Suan stretched out his hand to take it. He didn't feel that way, but since Lord Zhou said so, then he should read it. After he saluted and the steward backed away, Man Bao sighed, turned around and left the hospital with another servant. After getting on the carriage, Man Bao remembered that she no longer had a driver. The servant who sent her out was also a little confused. When he was hesitant to ask if he wanted to help, Man Bao pulled the carriage and turned a corner and went out. Descendant. Man Bao drove to the side of the Imperial College by himself. The newly built plaque for the Imperial Physician's office was new and beautiful, much better than the one facing the Imperial College not far away. Man Bao drove the carriage to the door, nodded with satisfaction, then threw the carriage to the guard at the gate, and went in with the book basket. The people from the Imperial Physician's office are doing freshman speeches and distributing textbooks. Man Bao carried the book basket to the teachers' offices to put it down, and then went to the martial arts field with his hands behind his back. On the martial arts field, Xiao Yuanzheng had already finished his speech, and at this time each class was distributing books and clothes. Zhou Liru was holding the book and a large burden, and his eyes were about to lose sight of the road. When he passed by Man Bao, he noticed something was wrong, so he quickly turned around and looked over. Looking through the middle of the bag, he saw that Man Bao was looking ahead. And immediately called, "Little ant." Man Bao turned her head, only then did she recognize Zhou Liru from under the bag and the book. She quickly reached out to take the bag in one hand, and took two more books by the way, and asked, "It's you, it's all yours." Thing. Zhou Liru nodded happily. The department sent 2 sets of clothes to each of us. Man Bao did not expect that Xiao Yuanzheng was so generous to the students, and was a little envious of them. They were teachers without clothes. See you at 9. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1749. Man Bao took Zhou Liru to her dormitory with a burden. The environment here is not as good as the next door Kuazi prison. 10 people live in one room. There are 5 small beds side by side, and there are 2 tables by the window. Zhou Liru occupied a good position, on the first bed on the left after entering the house. There were 10 people in the same dormitory, and only a small shelf was placed beside her bed to store things. Zhou Liru put the book on the table, unpacked the bag, took out the clothes and showed it to Man Bao. "Look at me, this one is winter clothes, this one is lighter," Xiao Yuanzheng said, "no matter what you wear inside." "What's the matter? You must wear school uniforms outside, and we can't be worse than the Kuazijian next door." Man Bao nodded, stretched out his hand and touched it, and said, "I didn't expect Sir Yang to be so generous, that he could provide you with such good winter clothes." "We also think it's good," Zhou Liru boasted in a low voice. "My grandfather and grandma sent me over to sign up early in the morning as soon as the former school started, so I was able to grab such a good bed, and I chose the rest." As soon as the voice fell, someone pushed the door and came in. When the visitor saw Zhou Man, he was stunned for a moment, then immediately put down what was in his hand, knelt down and kowtowed to Man Bao. "See you, sir." Man Bao was stunned for a moment, then immediately stepped forward to grab her, looked at her and asked with a smile, "I remember you, your name is Suye." Suye nodded fiercely, "Sir, I have always remembered the name you gave me, but you can also call me Dayat." "Sanya Zhou Liru." "Man Bao, I'll call you Suye." She bent over to pick up the thing from the ground for her. Suye dared to ask her to help. She quickly took it with a smile, and she put the thing directly next to Li Ru. "Sir, I heard that all our classes will be taught by you in the future." "No," Man Bao said, "I only teach 3 classes of Maiju, your class is not taught by me, as if their class was taught by me." Originally, she only wanted to teach 2 classes, a class in acupuncture, and a private class designated by each family to teach her. However, when everyone in the Taiyuan hospital discussed it, they found that the people admitted to the test also had high and low knowledge, and some did not need to learn from the pulse technique at all. For example, Zheng Gu and Lu Yunu, they have already read the 4 most basic medical books, and Zheng Xiao is a little worse. They took up the acupuncture places because they were not young enough, but after the new year, they could pass the examination in the department and be transferred to the physical therapy department. There is no need to start from scratch after entering the physical therapy department. You can use 3 or 4 months to figure out the arrangement. When the spring of next year starts, these students will be rearranged according to their abilities. At that time, the courses to be taught will be different. Xiao Yuan is considering Zhou Man's ability, so she must also bring a class of pulse technique in the physical therapy department. Man Bao couldn't help it, so he could only agree. Fortunately, there were not many courses at the beginning, and Xiao Yuan Zheng also chose a young man from the Taiyuan hospital to be her deputy. So not too busy. After all, Zhou Liru learned medical skills in advance, recognized a lot of medicinal materials, and was literate, so she was one of the first girls to be admitted to the physical therapy department. Except for her and a few female students, the remaining 23 places in the physical therapy department were all taken by the maids in the palace. They can read and know some medical theory, so they barely pass the exam. Xiao Yuan always pursues convenience in his work, so in order to facilitate management, he directly randomly divided 30 girls in the physical therapy department into 5 classes. 4 girls are in one place. Anyway, Man Bao himself doesn't know how to divide it. Suye dragged out a box from under her bed, touched it with her hand, and took out a package to give to Man Bao. Man Bao asked, "What is this?" "Jerky," Suye said, "my mother specially made it for Mr. She said, "Although Mr. didn't teach our class, the department agreed to ask me when Mr. spoke up. My mother said, 'Sir, you will be my mother from now on,' and the family even gave you bacon. I'll give it to you next time you bring." Man Bao, "Thank you, but no need." I want it," Suye forced into Man Bao's hands and said earnestly, "You are my rebirth parents, how can you not?" Man Bao. Zhou Liru. During the entanglement, the other people in the dormitory also came back. Seeing Man Bao, everyone put down their things and saluted. There is no way, the girls admitted in the Imperial Physician Office are basically all interviewed by Man Bao in person. Among the male Imperial Physicians, there is a female Imperial Physician, who looks the same age as them, can it not be noticeable? So everyone remembers Man Bao. Seeing that there were too many people, Man Bao immediately took the opportunity to go out and told them to pack up and go to class. Man Bao ran back to the office and breathed a sigh of relief. Imperial Physician Lu and the others were sitting on chairs drinking tea. When they saw her running in from outside, they asked with a smile, "What's wrong?" Man Bao exhaled and said, "Didn't you say you are in class now?" "That's almost it, why aren't you in class yet?" Imperial Physician Lu took a sip of tea and said slowly, "Xiao Yuanzhen was talking late in the morning, and he has to issue a book again, so it's too late." He smiled and said, "It's too late. It's the same thing when everyone has lunch and then take a nap before going to class." Man Bao, "Is it so casual? I signed up the day before yesterday, why didn't I publish the book?" Imperial Physician Lu said, "It was supposed to be posted yesterday, but yesterday the palace didn't know what was going on. The East Palace called all the palace maids and servants away, and everything that came out of the palace had to be checked in detail. The remaining batch of books we have in the Shangsha Bureau was detained. Last evening, Lord Yang personally came forward to bring the things out, so it was too late." Man Bao didn't speak any more. Imperial Physician Lu looked at Zhou Man's expression and pondered for a while, but did not ask her what happened to the East Palace. He only vaguely heard in the Imperial Hospital that a palace maid had committed suicide. "But I don't know why." Now the news in the palace is not easy to inquire. For the Imperial Physician Lu and others, who had to enter and leave the palace every day and were in contact with the people in the palace, the news was not easy to inquire about, let alone people outside. The news in the palace was immediately separated from the news outside, and they only had time to hear the news that a palace maid committed suicide, and the rest, all palaces began to screen, and many palace maids were taken away for investigation. So it was quiet outside the palace, and even the courtiers pretended not to know about the matter. Every day, they went to the court to discuss matters, and they dealt with official documents when they should deal with official documents, as if they knew nothing about these actions in the palace. But because many people have been taken away for investigation, not to mention that many channels have been interrupted, only at this moment no one dares to commit crimes and spread the news, so the people outside the palace only know a little bit about things in the palace. Not a lot. See you at 10 p.m. Farmer's Blessed Girl. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 1750. Not many people care about Zhou Man's departure from the palace. Everyone knows that the imperial physician's office is officially in class today, and it is normal for her to leave the palace. No one will come to her to inquire about the news. After all, she is smart but young. What if she doesn't know the balance, turns around and enters the palace and sells them? It would be bad if the emperor and the prince misunderstood that they were peeping at the court. Although their behavior is to spy on the court. Therefore, Tang He, who is often in and out of the court, and is also in charge of this case, his father, there are always people around old Master Tang, and everyone can always vaguely mention what is going on in the palace now. Old Master Tang said that he didn't know anything, the dog didn't go home, and they wouldn't talk about it when they got home, so go ask Yan Li if you have the ability. Who will ask Yan Li if they are brain dead? Even Yang Haoyi couldn't help shaking his head and smiling with Yang Heshu. Your Uncle Tang is more and more able to find reasons, who dares to go to Yan Li? Yang Heshu took a meal with the chopsticks, and then continued to eat as if nothing had happened, saying, Uncle Shi has always valued the rules, so he naturally won't tell the secrets of the palace to the outside world. Yang Haoyi smiled and said, what kind of secret palace matter is this? Since it was Yan Li who went to investigate, the person who came back still has to be sent to Dali Temple for trial. By the way, aren't you in the palace now? Do you know that this time? What happened in the palace? Yang Heshu didn't say much about the change. I haven't seen Zhai He in the past 2 days, but I heard that a palace maid who was involved in the affairs of the East Palace committed suicide. Last time, 2 servants in the East Palace died. Why did another palace maid die this time? The little emperor's grandson was only born a few days ago. Yang Heshu said, the maid at the Changguan Pavilion who died this time is not the one who serves the prince and the prince in the East Palace and the West Palace. I don't know why. Yang Haoyi nodded, no longer asked about this, but smiled at a plate of vegetables on the table. These are fresh vegetables sent from Tangquan Mountain. You don't like meat, I know you will be back at noon today to eat, so I specially let someone make it for you. Yang Heshu smiled and said, thank you, father. Lord Yang, what is the courtesy between you and my father and son? By the way, do you still have enough money on your body? I just sent some money from Zhuangzi, you can use it? Yang Heshu didn't use money in particular, but this time he nodded in response. Yang Haoyi was happy, and after eating, he asked someone to send the money to Yang Heshu. Yang Heshu opened the box and glanced at the gold inside, then closed it and looked at Wan Tian. Wan Tian stepped forward and glanced at it and said, it was the box that was sent from Shul Street last night. Just after he finished speaking, Qin Mu walked in quickly from the outside and whispered, Master Ho asked the housekeeper to drive to Shul Street. The Yang family on Shui Le Street is the foreign family of the 5th prince and the uncle's family of Yang Heshu. Yang Heshu stood in front of the window with his hands behind his back, nodded after a while and said, I see, you all go down. Qin Mu and Wanchen looked at each other worriedly, and finally retreated silently. Yang Heshu closed his eyes, stayed in the study for a long time, and finally rode out. Wan Tian quickly followed. The two walked around indiscriminately, and as they walked, they arrived at the Qiazijian. Yang Heshu stood outside the wall of Qiazijian, listening to the sound of reading aloud from inside, and his irritability disappeared a little. Man Bao, who was standing on the podium for the first time to teach the students, was so nervous that his palms were sweating, and he strangely forgot the unpleasantness of the past 2 days, and the restlessness and resentment in his heart dissipated a lot. She only had one class today. There were originally 3 classes, but Xiao Yuan was wasting all the time in the morning. However, she did not rush to leave after class, but transferred to 2 other classes. The students of the acupuncture class not only have to learn the pulse formulas, but also learn to recognize characters. Unlike the outside schools that teach people with 1,000 characters, here are 4 medical books including Maiju and Materia Medica to teach them to recognize characters. So the class will be slow at first. Man Bao came here just to say hello to them, and by the way, he ordered the names of Zheng Gu and Lu Yi's daughter, Zheng Xiao, and brought people out. The books you read and the things you learn are different from theirs, and the spring will be next year. After that, there will be an adjustment in the department. You are still studying according to the previous progress, and if you have time, you can help the gentleman to teach the students. Zheng Gu responded with his junior brother and junior sister. Man Bao nodded, and then went to pack his basket and leave. The concierge wrapped Man Bao's car, pulled her out the door, and asked, "Master Zhou drives the car by himself?" Man Bao nodded, put the book basket on the car, jumped into the car and drove away. When passing by the Kuazi prison next door, Man Bao saw Yang Hesha standing under the wall in a daze. Man Bao immediately reached out to say hello, "Brother Yang." Wan Tian glanced back and immediately reminded, "Master, it's Miss Man." Yang Hesha turned to look, saw Man Bao and smiled. Seeing that she was driving the carriage by herself, she handed the horse over to Wan Tian. "Where's your coachman?" Man Bao smiled and said, "I am myself." Yang Hesha knew that this was impossible. How could Zhou Man be allowed to leave the palace alone? But he didn't ask in detail, but nodded and said, "I'll take you into the palace." After saying that, he jumped into the carriage, nodded to Wan Tian, took the reins from Man Bao's hand, and drove the carriage to the imperial city. Man Bao moved a position and asked, "Brother Yang, why are you here in the imperial college? Are you here to find out the news?" Yang Heshu asked with a smile, "What news?" Xiao Yuan Zheng said that everything in our imperial physician's office is similar to that of the Kuazijian. I thought you were here to inquire about the news. When Yang Heshu heard it, he couldn't help laughing and said, "You forgot, I came from the imperial college." It was only then that Man Bao remembered, "That's right, it's okay to ask Bai Shan and the others. Why do you need to inquire about it yourself? Isn't senior brother going to the Yamen today?" Yang Hesha said, "There is nothing to do in the Yamen, so I went home." In fact, the palace is now on strict guard, and although no evidence has been found for this matter, Yang is also on the roster of suspicions, so he doesn't want to stay in the palace. I'm not comfortable with myself, and I'm also making trouble for others. Man Bao didn't know this yet, so he dropped his cap from the cab and said with a flicker, "I'm so envious, I don't think I have anything to do." Yang Hesha smiled and said, "Now that the crown princess has given birth, there are no more important patients in the palace. The rest of your business should be cultivating books and taking classes in the imperial physician's office, right?" Man Bao nodded. Xiao Yuan Zheng said that if the class is readjusted next year, the rest of the medical books will be compiled as soon as possible, so it is still quite busy. Yang Hesha nodded, "Since I'm so busy, from tomorrow onwards, I'll drop by and give you a ride." Ah, Man Bao looked at him in confusion. "Bai Shan came to see me this morning. He wants me to take care of you more in the future. I think I will go out of the palace to visit the imperial physician's office more often in the next few days. Let's just go together." Man Bao's eyes lit up when he heard it. "Okay, tomorrow I won't be driving the carriage, I'll just ride, and I'll ride Qiji." Yang Hesha smiled and nodded. He didn't tell Zhou Man. Bai Shan was also suspicious of Yang's. He said, "No matter who did this, Man Bao ruined their affairs. Those adults may not be open-minded, so I want to ask Yang Xuexian to replace them. Take care of Man Bao. When it comes to the right to speak in a living family, Yang Heshu is bigger than Tang He, and with his attitude, Man Bao will be much safer. He hoped that Man Bao would not be implicated at the beginning of those big men's fights, but as long as the initial irritating stage was past and things faded, he had a way to make things no longer involve Man Bao. Good night.